Good morning everyone, I am Anjali Pangi, Assistant Professor of English. Today we are going to discuss Introduction to Communication. So today we are going to learn the meaning of communication, the process of communication and the types of communication. The meaning of communication, the process of communication, and the types of communication. So what does communication mean? Communication is a process where people share their ideas, information, feelings, emotions, thoughts and so on. Communication as a process involves two people at least. One has a sender and other has a receiver. One has a sender and other has a receiver. In a common representative, some people call it a mutual understanding process where two participants or more participants exchange information and share meaning. In a common representation of communication process, we have a sender on the one side and receiver on the other side. In between, we have a channel. We have a message, we have another channel which gives the message to the receiver. So how does communication process work? As a sender encodes the message, the sender passes the message through a channel. The sender passes the message through a channel. So what is the channel? The channel could be a upward channel, it could be a downward channel, it could be a horizontal channel or could be a diagonal channel in an organizational context. The message then get delivered to the receiver and the receiver tries to understand his or her own attitudes, backgrounds, culture and social system. This particular process is known as decoding of the message. Once the receiver decodes the message, he or she understands the message and after learning the message, what is there in the message, the receiver sends a feedback. Sends a feedback to the receiver. Sends a feedback to the receiver. Okay? This makes the complete communication process rather a cyclical process. Right? Rather a cyclical process. So, from the sender to the receiver, then from the receiver to the sender, communication process goes on. Okay? Sender, channel, message. proximus, right? In between this communication process, there are certain barriers or hurdles. This in general term is known as annoyance, a filter or barrier to the communication process. The next point we are going to discuss today is the types of communication. So what are the different types of communication? What are the different types of communication? Communication can be divided into different categories. Communication can be divided into different categories. The first, let's discuss. The first category is based on the use of language. Whether we have verbal communication and non-verbal communication. Verbal communication and non-verbal communication. The second category could be based on the medium or mode of expression. This either oral or written communication. The next category is whether communication is formal or informal. This totally depends on the relationship that the sender and the receiver share. As then, organizational context, we have upward, downward, horizontal and diagonal forms of communication. The next category is formal and informal communication. As the organizational context, we have upward, downward, horizontal and diagonal forms of communication, right? And then we have interpersonal group or mass communication. Depending on how many participants are actually involved in the process of communication. Now to start with, verbal and non-verbal communication. What is verbal communication? Verbal communication is use of words. So verbal communication means using of language to communicate, whereas non-verbal communication is not using any language to communicate or not using any language during the process of communication. Okay? Then how do we communicate? We communicate using our body language, using sign language, using certain symbols, even through demonstrations. For example, we have so many examples. For non-verbal communication. For example, traffic signal, which is a sign. हम लोग ट्रैफिक सिग्नल देखे होंगे ना. Signal is an example of sign communication. ट्रैफिक पुलिस भी जेस्चर देता है, राइट लेफ्ट हैंड को जेस्चर करता है, उससे हम समझते हैं कि ये कम्युनिकेशन है। हम इधर एक हैंड को ऐसे रख के दिखाता है तो इधर जाओ, ऐसे करता है तो इधर इस तरफ जाओ। सो ये एक क्या है, कम्युनिकेशन, नॉन वर्बल कम्युनिकेशन। अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट we have oral or written communication based on the mode of expression. We use our voice, spoken language to communicate with people. We call it oral communication. Whereas if we use the words through writing, or graphological representation of a language is called the written communication. We use memos, letters, messages, even text messages. The channel like social media, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, that's we do nowadays as a part of our written communication. And oral communication examples are, right now I am standing before you and speaking to you. This is an example of oral communication. Apart from that, we have meetings, group discussions, we have conversations that all come under oral communication. So the next category is formal and informal communication. In a society, we share relationship as also we share relationship in an organization. In an organization, we have hierarchy. We have a senior person who is the superior and a junior person who is considered to be a subordinator, and this relationship remarks the way we actually interact in an organization. Why we are dealing with official aspects with the senior, we are interacting or we are formally communicating with them, right? And when we are in a social group or a peer group with friends, we are communicating how? Informally, right? Now that's the basic distinction of formal and informal communication. हम लोग दोस्तों के साथ कैसे बात करते हैं और एक इंस्टीट्यूशन और एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में कैसे बात करते हैं, डिफरेंट रहता है ना फॉर्मल और इनफॉर्मल में. समझ में आ गया? ओके. नाउ टॉक अबाउट द नेक्स्ट कैटेगरी ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन एंड that is organizational communication. Organizational communication. So, organizational communication based on the different channel we used in the organization. So, what is this channel? What is this channel? Since I told you there is a hierarchy. There is a hierarchy in an organization. Therefore, there are levels and people performed different activities in an organization at different levels, right? Then communication flows upper level to lower level. We call it downward communication. Upper level to lower level. We call it downward communication. Downward communication. Right? And downward communication, then lower level to upper level, what we call it? Huh? Upward communication, right? Upward communication. People also work at the same level in an organization. When they communicate, we call it horizontal communication. Horizontal communication. In a same organization, क्या करते हैं लोग? सेम ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में सेम लेवल में काम करते हैं, तो लोगों को क्या बोलते हैं? वो कम्युनिकेशन को क्या बोलते हैं? होरिजेंटल कम्युनिकेशन. ओके. एंड वेयर a high level person in an organization communication with a lower level person of another department in the same organization, we call it a diagonal communication. So this actually completes different channel of communication within an organization. Okay. The next category, communication of communication is totally depends or based on the number of participants who are the part of the communication process. Okay. The next category is group or mass interpersonal group or mass communication. Scholar says that one-to-one communication takes place between two people or one-to-one in a very small group, say what, three to four people. That type of communication is personal communication or interpersonal communication. Sorry, interpersonal communication. When there is a small group where 5 to 10 members or 10 numbers of people, then it's known as group communication. And when there are participants who are sitting in large numbers, suppose an audience in auditorium and the speaker is making a speech, this type of communication is mass communication. Okay? Well, however, this communication is not restricted only to the speaker and the audience. It is also the media. For example, the newspaper is an example of mass communication. The television is an example of mass communication because we have a sender. Who sends the message to many people at the same time. Okay? So there are different types of communication that we have for today. Okay, today's session. So before we wrap up, let's recapitulate what we are discussed today. The definition of communication, process of communication. Of course, not to forget the various to communicate, which acts as a hindrance to the process. And finally, we are categorized communication into different aspects and discuss different types of communication like